Welcome to episode 128 of Wheel Bearings. We have a very special guest with us today. Oh, first of all, I'm Sam Abul-Samad from Navigant Research.
I'm Dan Roth from Forbes.
I'm Rebecca Land from Rebecca Drives.
I didn't know if you were going to go or not. I was leaving it open. I was like, oh, dead air.
And joining us today from across the table from me here is...
Bryan Salesky. Nice to see all of you again.
Welcome, Bryan.
Great to be here with you, Bryan. We're sitting here in Dearborn. Bryan's in town for a day or two, and we managed to wrangle him for a little conversation about autonomous vehicles. So I get to talk to Bryan on a pretty regular basis, so I don't want to dominate the conversation today. So why don't I let you two go first with your questions?
All right. You know what? I'll let Rebecca go first because I'm sure she has better questions.
You're also polite with one another.
I know, right?
You just wait.
Don't worry, it deteriorates very quickly.
Okay, good. All right.
It goes off into tangents that you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
So, Bryan, it's so nice to talk to you. We met a couple years ago in San Francisco, coincidentally at a Ford event as well when I moderated a panel. I think that you were on and speaking. So, when in that conversation, really Argo was fairly new and the investment that Ford had made was fairly new as well. And there's been a lot of changes since then. But one of the things that I'll never forget is that we talked about the geographical specificity of driving behaviors. And you had mentioned I think it was like the Pittsburgh left. And I talked about the Michigan left and then the Boston jug handles and all these crazy ways that we manage left-hand turns in our world. And so I wondered, is that still part of the conversation? If so, how's that coming along? Just kind of where does that stand?
Yeah, no, it's one of my favorite topics is all the possible left turns styles in the U.S. and abroad. So, at Argo, we're testing in 5 different cities now, all of different styles and geographies. So we've got we've got Austin and Miami and DC and in just those 3 alone, there's a lot of differences. And so, by taking that sort of testing approach, it's been very helpful because we get to encounter all the different, myriad of types of not just left turns, but more broadly speaking, how the different actors in the world behave differently, right? So we get a sense or a measure of where the dangerous intersections might be, where do pedestrians likely jaywalk. We get a sense for how things change over time and over seasons. And all of that helps us just make the system better and help us to better anticipate and predict what those road users are going to do. Miami, there's a huge scooter population. Same thing in Austin, becoming more prevalent in DC. And, getting experience in how they tend to navigate and the types of routes that they take and how they behave. All of that information helps us just make our system better. So it's definitely in the conversation. It's not just left turns. It's all variety of things that we learn when we go to a city.
It's fascinating.
Bryan, one of the things that is particularly challenging about this is, how when you think about going to a production system with this, you've got all these different types of driving styles. Is that something that your system is going to be able to just automatically adapt to those when you go into a new city? Or are you going to have, maybe different calibration sets or different rule sets, that you deploy in different cities?
Yeah, I think a good way to put it is different calibration sets. So it's one system, it's one platform. It's not like we're engineering a whole new system for each city. But we're also not going so far as to allow it to do what would be called online learning. So the ability for an algorithm to sort of teach itself on the fly. And the reason we don't do that is because what if it learns the wrong thing by accident? That would be bad, right? And so what we want to do is we want to take these systems, our vehicles that we map with, and that we go, when we first go into a city, we sort of have a launch plan of how we not only map the city but also get experience, all the experience that I just talked about. And so there's sort of an adaptation period, and we get to see how well the system we've built works in the city. Where are some of the areas for improvement, and then we make sort of equivalent of parameter changes that tune it to that environment. And that has to do with sort of how confident it drives. It has to do with how it behaves at certain intersections. There may be some intersections where there's a social protocol where you don't ever block. We call it block the box, or don't block the intersection. There's other intersections where if you don't do that, you're never going to make your way through. And so we learn those types of things and teach the autonomous driving system what the best way is to approach those types of intersections and other types of scenarios.
So back in 2017, you told Kristen Korosek of she was at The Verge at the time, that you wanted to give cars the eyes, the ears, the brains they need to operate without humans. And your timeline was 2021. So that's now a year and a half away. So how are you doing with that? Is that goal still 2021, or are we learning as we go that we're going to need more time?
Well, the goal, and what I said at the time is the goal was 21, and that still is an important year and an important milestone for us where, we expect to have initial deployments. But the scale of those deployments is going to vary over time, and it's going to be a slower ramp than I think what most people would suggest in the industry. Our view is that these vehicles are going to get deployed and operate in small sections of the city, limited number of vehicles, and then it will grow over time. It's going to grow where we learn the demand is. It's going to grow based on the types of partnerships we have with businesses in these cities. And it's going to, it's going to be a gradual deployment. In terms of, and that's just sort of the natural cadence of building any business, right? Yeah. It's an evolution. It's not a revolutionary thing.
Sure. Yeah. It's not a gotcha question. It's just, I'm checking in.
Yeah. No. I'm giving the full answer, right? Cause I think this is an important topic to, clarify for people. Now I separate everything I just said from when is the driver removed from the car. You can start to build these businesses and learn and market with the driver in the vehicle. And still monitoring the self-driving system. And I think the question of when the driver gets pulled is a whole separate question and is in parallel to everything I just described. And for me, it's not just, when does the data tell us that it's safe and it's ready, but it's also when is the community ready to accept that? And I think that may vary city by city. I think policymakers will obviously have a say in this, and to me that's even another question in addition to what you just asked.
When Waymo launched Waymo One in Chandler, Arizona last December, one of the surprises to a lot of people was that they still kept the safety drivers in the vehicles, and they, in fact, they're still there today. Do you anticipate following a similar pattern, in 2021, launching commercial deployments, but perhaps, either in all or some of those, at least 3 cities that that have been identified now, Miami, DC, and Austin, anticipate potentially retaining the safety drivers for some period of time after that commercial launch?
Yeah. So, for me, it's hard for me to know exactly what commercial launch is. As I said earlier, I think there's these initial deployments where we're going to be serving people and businesses potentially, and when it actually launches or what launch is, to me, is sort of a fuzzy thing, right? And as you start to learn and as you build these businesses, to me that takes a separate evolutionary path from when you pull the driver. I don't tie pulling the driver to any of those particular milestones. To me, that's a separate question, and it's hard to link it to a date. But I think what you saw with the Waymo deployment, makes sense to me in terms of the natural evolution of things, which is they're simultaneously trying to stand up a business as well as prove out their self-driving technology. And I think, for them, that's obviously 2 threads of development.
I mean, and when it actually does deploy as well, when you talk about commercial deployment, what does that actually look like? I mean, is it still individual cars, or is it some other offering that's more efficient? I mean, you're thinking about efficiency too. Like, you get back to a bus with a safety driver. Well, that's a train. You know, like
Right.
how does commercial deployment actually sort of get out of the gate? And does that look like people think it looks now, where it's everybody's own individual car just drives itself, or there's some other way it's more of a walled garden in some ways? You know, it starts off in ports, which they're working on that solution, or farms already have automated vehicles too. Like, where does it actually start?
Right. No, it's a good question. So we probably have to unpack it a little bit. So I think for the first question is it personal car ownership, or is it some sort of shared fleet or a service? And in our view, it's the latter. It's some sort of service that's provided. And the reason for that is because of the cost of the technology is relatively high. Most people wouldn't be able to afford that to equip their own personal vehicle with all the self-driving tech. So the better way to offer it is to actually provide a service, whether it be to deliver something or to move people, and to spread the cost of the technology over the lifetime of the asset. So, imagine if the vehicle is able to operate for roughly 300,000 miles with some routine maintenance associated with it. You can imagine spreading the cost over those 300,000 miles, and all of a sudden on a per mile basis, it's not that expensive. So that's the idea on how I think this will be deployed initially. In terms of the types of business models, there's so many, and that's what makes this field so exciting in my view. Even if you just, a lot of people talk about, well, is it ride hailing or is it goods movement or is it both? Well, to me, there's a whole bunch of slices within each of those. There's tons of different use cases in the goods delivery side alone, whether it be last mile delivery, door to door, or if it's going from one sort of pickup drop off point to another. There's all sorts of ways you can sort of slice this problem, and to me, that's the challenge that I think everybody in the industry has, is to sort their way through that and figure out what's the best way to marry what the tech can do today with the opportunity, and how does that change as the system matures and as as logistics changes over time. So that whole thing is kind of a giant Rubik's cube that I think everybody's wrestling with.
Yeah, well, sure, and especially. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh, I just wanted to because we talk a lot about the sort of long-term plans of all this, but I want to get into a little bit more of like today. What, in your mind, Bryan, was there one thing that was easier to accomplish that you were surprised, like pleased about, or is there something that has just proven so much more difficult than you expected and kind of more of a day-to-day thing?
Yeah, I don't think anything's easy. to be fair,
I don't know. George Hotz seemed to make it sound super easy. You just hack a bunch of consumer stuff and use it off-label, and it drives your car.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, it isn't too difficult to, put together a smart team and to build a prototype, right? But it sort of follows the 80-20 rule, right? I think to get 80% of the way there is not too hard, but the last 20% is super hard. Yeah. And, it may take even longer than it took the time to get to the 80%. So, there's, that definitely applies here. In terms of what's difficult, I mean, look, I think the question that's before all of us is, how do we best, assemble, a company that this is what I spend a lot of my time on. How do we build a company that's going to be around and last for a long period of time, and that's going to actually solve this in a meaningful way, right? I want to assemble a team that's committed and mission driven, that wants to see the evolution of all these businesses develop and see the technology mature and move from one platform to the next and from one partner to the next. How do we build a lasting brand and a lasting product that's going to really solve this problem in a meaningful way? And that's what we set out to do at Argo, and that's what I'm really proud about, is that it all starts with the people. It starts with getting mission-driven people who, there's no drama. They just want to come to work and they want to solve this problem. They want to make, they all have their different stories, but generally speaking, they want to see transportation be safer and more accessible. And I think that while we're one piece in the overall puzzle and that we're focused on the self-driving system, there's a ton of challenging problems to work on there. And we're driven by the sense that we can build this and deploy it in a truly meaningful product, not just a prototype, but something that's actually going to be embedded as sort of Argo inside in all of these vehicles and become a platform that that's going to, enable more efficient ways to get from A to B in the future. I mean, that's what we're after. That's what we're driven by. And sure, there's a lot of challenges along the way, and there's a ton of hard problems, but I think, that's why we exist. That's what gets us up out of bed in the morning. And,
to expand on that a little bit, you've got partners here at Ford, and even within Ford, there's multiple teams that are part of this. You've got a team within Autonomous Vehicles LLC business unit that is working on the business models of, what's the consumer facing business of how they're going to deploy these things. There's Ford earlier this summer acquired Quantum Signal, which is going to help a lot of the Ford teams with things like, working around on the user experience around the vehicle, how people interact with the vehicle.
Right.
It's not nearly as simple as just building it. I mean, not that building an AV stack is simple, but I mean, that is only one piece of a very large puzzle.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, you have to partner in order to be successful here. There's so many different aspects to the problem, whether it be user experience or the functional safety aspect, how to build in all the redundant control systems, which you and I have talked about before, Sam, right? Into the vehicle platform. Conventional vehicles today that are meant to be human driven are not at all ready to accept an autonomous vehicle stack. There's a lot of changes that need to be made there. And so our partnerships with Ford and now VW enable us to have the right close relationship with these automakers to be able to make the changes necessary to adapt the vehicle to the AV stack and vice versa. And it takes one team, one mission, it takes a coalition of people across the supply base and our partners to actually be able to bring this to the world in a meaningful way.
Well, if you're going to own the cars too, it sounds like this is something that you've thought about in terms of as it comes out, that it's less individual ownership than it is some sort of service. Well, then you own the machine and you're trying to maximize its use. So it's got to also handle all kinds of conditions, and
that's right. Yeah. And I'll tell you, one of the benefits there is you can actually, you can do the routine maintenance in a predictable way, right? Because you own the vehicles. You can have great, maintenance history and track every aspect of the lifetime of a vehicle. You can do proactive maintenance. The other thing is that, with our partners, right, automakers, one piece of the business that maybe doesn't get talked about a lot is their parts delivery and service network. Ford in the U.S. is enormous, their footprint.
Oh,
right?
yeah. That's actually,
dealer.
That was one of the things that in the police fleet side of things.
Yes.
Ford was really, really, really good at that. And that's why a lot of fleets stuck with Ford, even when Daimler Chrysler jumped back in with the Charger. They said, yeah, we can't get the parts. We can't get the support. Ford has that game locked up. So they know what
that's right. And so when it comes to keeping vehicles on the road and being able to maintain them and to be able to get, parts and service quickly and done properly, they have a huge advantage there in terms of fleet management.
Just to follow up on that sort of car handle all conditions question, there's chatter about LIDAR and about stuff like FLIR, like infrared and stuff. So what does your stack look like? What sensors are going to enable you to actually drive fully self-drive in adverse weather without any kind of, sort of special measures, like a person getting out there and scraping the sensors off? It's like, how are you going to manage that? Is that something that you've cracked yet?
Well, so we've aligned around LIDAR, radar, and camera. Each sensing modality has its strengths and weaknesses. We're a big believer that LIDAR is an important part of the equation. It's it operates in 3 dimensions and is able to get a fair amount of range if you're using the right instrument. And it's an important part of the overall equation. Strengths in one complement the weaknesses in the other. All 3 modes are super important. All 3 modes have issues in really bad weather. So, as an example, fog is probably the hardest type of sort of bad weather scenario to solve, mainly because both LIDAR and camera are heavily affected by it. Ultimately changes completely what it can see, and it becomes a very different problem. Of course, when you think as a human, how does a human drive through fog? They make a heck of a lot of assumptions, right?
Totally.
And so
Assume it's all clear on the inside.
that's right. And so it's right. And so this sort of requires what we would call optimistic planning.
Oh, that's lovely.
And so is it impossible to solve? No, but it's definitely among the more challenging weather conditions to deal with. And it's something that is on the roadmap that's kind of further out. Now, light falling rain, we can handle that relatively well today. The challenge there is to just have a really good sensor cleaning system to either blow or wipe the droplets off. Falling snow, a little bit harder because it sticks to stuff. It can freeze. Anyway, so, each type of precipitation comes with its own set of problems. And yeah, there's a long tail associated with solving all of those things. It's hard to put a timeline on any of it, because really we can build a great business really just going to cities where the weather is decent. And that's what I think you're going to see a lot of companies do, and including us. And then over time, we'll start, as we solve and tackle those hard weather problems, we'll start to scale elsewhere.
Yeah. Recently, like earlier this summer, I think you guys started getting your latest generation of test vehicles from Ford that the sensor stack on the roof now has cleaning systems.
It does.
Integrated into that. How's that working out for you?
It actually works remarkably well, and we've been able to operate in falling rain that's sort of light to moderate, let's say, pretty well. It isn't perfect. We're still iterating it. It was the first generation that came out, but yeah, I mean, it's a really great system that Ford came up with, and how they part of how they integrated the sensors onto the car. And we'll continue to refine it.
I think one of the funniest things about it, when they announced it was, some of the testing they did, they developed a bug launcher.
Yes, they
to
did.
launch bugs at the cameras,
Yeah.
and they're using these air curtains to help deflect the bugs.
Absolutely, and the people who get to test these vehicles, sometimes I'm envious because of some of the stuff that they get to do. We absolutely torture the vehicle on the test track, and they're coming up with all kinds of crazy things. Remote controlled skateboards, fake pedestrians that jump out in the middle of nowhere or drop from the sky, all kinds of things.
I remember being on the Ford test track where they had like big giant things come out to test the emergency braking. It's terrifying.
Yep. It is terrifying.
It's absolutely terrifying.
But it's very satisfying when you see the system work well, though. You're absolutely right. It is.
One of our Twitter followers wanted to know, I thought this was an interesting question about infrastructure. And do you see LIDAR potentially being used in infrastructure to help with self-driving cars, like busy intersections and stuff?
Well, we absolutely see that as part of the equation. We're not building the system in such a way that we have to have it, but the way we look at it is that as cities begin to invest in smart infrastructure, whether that be, cameras in the intersections that are monitoring throughput, whether it be vehicle to vehicle or vehicle to infrastructure communications, whatever the source it may be, we just view that data as another sensor input, right? We view it as another input that helps complete our picture of what's around the vehicle and the state of the world. And we'll use that to help us navigate it. One of the places where it's really useful is where there's what we call occlusions at an intersection. So imagine we're getting ready to take a right turn and we'd like to take a right on red, where it's allowed. But there's a concrete pole or there's a barrier or something that prevents us from being able to see around the corner. With the infrastructure, we can have better assurances of what's around the corner and what the safe action is to take. Without it, we're sort of creeping very delicately, much like a human would, to sort of peer around the corner and see if it's safe to go. That sort of infrastructure, I think, is a key piece. Is certainly a key piece, and where it's available, we want to use it.
And, to add to that, one of the other companies that's developing this stuff, May Mobility, the work they're doing here in Detroit, for example, one of the things that they do is they have roadside units mounted. They're operating on fixed routes around downtown Detroit, and they have roadside units mounted on poles with cameras and radio transmitters, so that they're up where they can always see the traffic signals. So because they're operating these little tiny GEM electric vehicles.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times when you're, driving around the city, you might be stuck behind a truck or a bus. You can't see the traffic signals. So that, they put those up there where they can always have a clear view of the traffic signal, and they can transmit that information back to the vehicles. And, information like that can be useful to help make the system a little more robust, to add to that situational awareness.
Absolutely. We talk about safety in a lot of different terms, but one of the ways to add to safety is to just have additional inputs about the state of the world, whether it be traffic lights or the positions of various objects, whatever it might be. Absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt, Rebecca, but one more thing. Now that you've got a relationship with Volkswagen, and I don't know if you've actually started working with them yet, or you're waiting until the deal is closed. But Audi, for example, for the last couple of years they've had some vehicle to infrastructure communications in various cities where they're using the LTE connection that's in the vehicle to get traffic signal information from the city's central traffic control computer. Is that something that you're looking at integrating into your system, that sort of capability?
Yeah, it's something we would love to integrate in. We haven't had those discussions yet, just because, as you said, we're sort of in this quiet period where we're waiting for regulatory approval for the deal to officially close.
Okay.
Yep.
I was wondering, one of the areas that I think is really exciting is the commercial space. And you touched on this a little bit earlier, but, the long haul truckers that we see and such. And are you working in that space as well to get some of this technology into those sort of semis and, as they travel across the country?
Yeah, we're definitely looking at it. It's absolutely another interesting business case. It's part of the overall goods delivery stack, right? And like I said, goods delivery there's so many different use cases, different vehicle types and platforms and trips. Definitely long haul trucking is one piece of that overall pie.
Yeah. Do you see most of these vehicles, whatever they eventually come to look like, do you see them as primarily electric, or do you see them as having internal combustion engines as well? A combination? Just talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Well, in order to support the self-driving system, the vehicle needs to be electrified in some way, shape, or form. And whether that's a hybrid or a full electric or, a giant alternator or whatever it might be, we're flexible in that regard as long as the power system can meet our requirements. I think the broader question, though, of what is sort of what is the way of the future is, I think electrification is inevitable. That's where everybody's going. And the key is, though, to work with the vehicle manufacturers to sort of understand what we want to do near term and what we want to do in the long term, and plug into their overall strategy, which, let's face it, it's not being influenced so much by autonomous vehicles or autonomy. It's being influenced by fuel economy and regulation and standards,
sure.
Right?
So
we want to be able to just sort of plug into their roadmaps.
Yeah. Where does regulation fit into this? I mean, is this something that you're constantly talking to them about, or do you feel like is it a barrier?
Oh, no, it's not a barrier at all. We welcome discussions with regulators. We've had great discussions at the federal, state, and local levels where we operate. We welcome those discussions. We love to educate and show folks where we are and sort of help make what we're doing transparent, so that they can understand how the technology works to some degree, right? Understand how we're thinking about how deployment might work. And, we see the policymakers as sort of an important constituency and folks that we need to be absolutely working very closely with.
When you talk to regulators, do you feel like they have a sufficient understanding of the complexities of this technology, and do they grasp the issues around, what needs to be done or perhaps what should be done in terms of regulation?
Well, it certainly varies. These folks are whether elected officials or staff, they come from all different backgrounds, right? And so a lot of times what we find is we just need to understand what their starting point is, and then sort of begin the educational process. I would say, though, that every every person in sort of a regulator or policymaking context that we've met, they've all been extremely eager to understand and get that education and want to understand, in basic terms, look, what are the good things this is going to do, and what are the things that we have to watch out for, and how do we deploy it in the right way. And so as long as you have that sort of common starting point, I think everything goes really well.
Well, I think that's the thinking that we have to train us in the media and you folks in the industry that it's building these things. Is we sort of have to train everybody who's paying attention. Right? It's got to be really frustrating when you talk about this stuff, and a lot of the coverage is teaching the public to expect that these are just going to pop out fully formed, perfect, work for everyone, everywhere, in all conditions. And regular cars don't do that now. So
yeah, and we aren't doing that, right? And that, at least at Argo, we're not doing that. Neither is Ford. The way I look at it is the education part of it is not what frustrates me. We enjoy that aspect to it, and that's an important part of what we should be doing. But you're right, the expectation that somehow has been set in the press or in the mass media, I think, is that, like you said, these are right around the corner. They're going to be operating everywhere. They're going to be in your lives, day in and day out. That just simply isn't the case, right? Going back to what we discussed earlier, it's going to be relatively modest deployments that will grow over time, and it will be done in concert with the city and the community that we're serving.
Yeah, and it may not even be all that exciting, right? There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that can...
Well, let me tell you, this stuff is not exciting when it works.
Well, yeah,
ideally.
It's just a safe driver. That's what we're shooting for.
Yeah, I mean,
the no drama applies there as well, huh?
Right. I travel a lot, and when I arrive somewhere, people inevitably ask me, "How was your trip?" And say, "Uneventful," which is just the way I like it.
Exactly.
Totally.
I don't know. I kind of like hitting air pockets and stuff when you're in flights.
You're so weird.
God.
Thrilling.
I'm not flying with you.
Exactly. So, Bryan, what does it look like in other parts of the world in terms of development, usage? Just talk to me globally.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to what I know, which is, obviously China's leaning in really hard. AI in general is set as a priority for that country, and they want to sort of gain ground as quickly as possible. And it looks like they're entertaining ways to potentially even build cities from scratch, right? Which China can do with all the infrastructure necessary to accelerate it's crazy. The speed of deployment. It's crazy what they're able to do. You look at Singapore, which is also leaning way in on this, and I think is also taking certainly a measured but as aggressive approach as possible to see this sort of technology get deployed. And they also are in the they have the right sort of government system in place to be able to also be an accelerant to the deployment of this sort of technology.
Yeah, there's right, culturally it's appropriate as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Exactly. And then if you turn into Europe, and I think Europe's a very complex area. It's an area that I think we're going to see a lot more unfold in the coming years. But each area sort of has its own story to tell, and about who's bullish on it and who isn't. It almost really comes down even potentially to sort of a city by city level in Europe.
Sure, that's fascinating.
But one of the questions we had from Twitter again was Asia. You mentioned Asia. China has because of the nature of the government there, they have the ability to do a lot of things from scratch if they choose to do so.
Yeah.
But you're not operating in China, and I don't think you have any. Do you have any current plans to do that, or because there are some restrictions on China?
Absolutely, yeah. No, our focus right now is U.S. first, and then with VW coming on, will be Europe. It's particular parts of Europe. We have nothing to announce in the way of China or elsewhere at the moment.
Okay.
When you do want to break that news, please let us know. We'll have you back on. Look,
the answer is we're always studying all of the markets, right? I'm just, I'm being open with you about where our plans are today.
No. It's just, and certainly it's going to be taking a system that's sort of designed and optimized for the U.S., you might have some things to learn if you go to a place like India or China, for sure.
There'll be plenty to learn, and in China in particular, the government has come out with a fairly rigid but open set of requirements that says, look, they want to be heavily involved in the cybersecurity. They want to own the data. There's a number. They want to. You must be working with a Chinese company in order to do the mapping work. There's a number of requirements in China that makes for it to be a very different system. It's not just plug and play with what we would be doing in the U.S.
And speaking of mapping, one of the questions on Twitter was about gating factors to move into more cities. You talked about understanding the realities, the behavior of those cities. But what about once you choose to go into a new city, is that an expensive proposition to go into a city? You do HD maps. What can you talk a little bit about? Once you've opted to go to a new city, what's involved in that process?
Right. So when we first go to a city, we start to understand as much as we can about where the demand is for the different types of businesses that we're looking at. And then we send a small fleet. Sometimes it's not even more than 2 cars, and we start mapping the city. We start driving the streets. We get information about sort of how the lanes are connected, how wide each of the lanes are, and where the traffic lights are positioned, and various aspects of the rules of the road. That gives us sort of enough information to get the basics. We take that back, process it, and then create a map. That map then gets loaded onto the vehicles and is used to test out the autonomy system. And then again, just with a few, you can do it with a pretty small number of vehicles, or sometimes we'll put more depending on the size and how we're prioritizing things. And then we'll start to test the autonomous system and validate that the map is accurate, and also start to learn pretty quickly, where the system works well and where it needs some refinement. And then we have a whole team that, piles through the information that comes back from those tests and then starts to create, work for the development team. And that becomes a very much a process that happens day in and day out. And in general, the process can work pretty quickly. We can map a small downtown area in a day and be operational within a week, and then sort of expand gradually from there.
And when I visited your offices last summer, or summer of 2018, and saw the process that you guys have built up internally for building maps, and today you do all your own maps. Is that something going forward that you foresee continuing to do as you expand into new areas, doing your own maps or working with outside vendors?
Well, I'll tell you, I would love to buy it if I could. The issue is that the way in which the vehicle knows where it is in the city to kind of a centimeter level of resolution. So we're talking very, very accurate. It's better than even what basic unaided GPS could give you. The way it does that is it actually uses this map information and compares it to what its sensors see in real time and does sort of a matching process. Okay, without getting into too much detail, that's essential to how we do the what we call localization, or how does the vehicle know where it is. It turns out that because of that process, and because we're using the sensors on the vehicle, the visual sensors, to be able to do that localization process, that the maps are very coupled to the sensing configuration on the cars. And so if someone wanted to sell me an HD map, right, if the data was presented in a very different format than what we're expecting in terms of the types of sensors that are on our car, then it becomes very challenging to be able to use it, right? I can take any map in order to get street information, addresses, street names, that kind of thing. But the types of maps we're talking about is not so much that type of data. It's more so information about sort of the broad 3D structure of the city all around me, so that I can apply it to this so-called localization problem.
There's another guy that runs a company that's doing some of the stuff that claims you don't actually need those HD maps. Do you foresee a time when that might be true?
Not probably in my lifetime. It's too important of a piece of information that helps the vehicle understand everything about the world around it, and if nothing else, let's say algorithms advance over the next couple of decades where it becomes less and less reliant on the map, you're still going to want a map to sort of gut check that those algorithms are doing the right thing. It's a great, any sort of prior information that can go through a QA process is really helpful and is an essential part of the safety case at the end of the day. It can be used to make sure the system is operating properly.
Where does it go? And let's look out 10 years. Is this on, Argo AI chips that you guys are making and providing to, for sale or to Ford? And are they using it in, now the technology has been downsized. Moore's law sort of applies, right? Where it gets smaller and cheaper with every generation exponentially. What does it look like? Where do you guys think it goes?
Just to add to that, do you foresee using customized silicon for your systems at some point?
I could see us doing that at some point. I think that the algorithms are maturing at such a rapid rate that there's a risk that if you invest in custom silicon too soon, that you've actually created a chip that no longer is relevant to the software that's running on it. And so there's a chicken.
I bought a whole computer like that.
Yeah. That's not good point. It's not uncommon even in the consumer world, right? Or, you get the latest video game and it no longer runs. You got to get new hardware, right? Yeah. So there's a process that we need to follow here where, as when we think that the algorithms have stabilized to a point where it's worthwhile to invest, we'll do it. We're not at that point yet.
So right now it's better to stay with a more general purpose compute platform than a custom one.
Right now we're preserving for flexibility and then over time that will start to change. Absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Are there other industries that you're working with as well, like shipping or aviation?
Well, our partners are talking to all sorts of different businesses to see, what sort of services that we can provide and to come up with as many use cases as possible for automated vehicles. So, they're talking to people across all different types of industries. And I think the challenge from what we were talking about earlier is how do you prioritize and sort of slice that up so that you can marry up, the problem or the opportunity with kind of what the technology is able to do now, near, and in the future.
What about, one of the challenges when you start looking at, the business side of this is not just the vehicle, transporting goods around the city or transporting people, but also, the last 100-foot problem of how do you get whatever it is from the vehicle to a doorstep or to a locker or whatever it might be. Are you looking also at building the systems to power maybe smaller robots that handle that last 100-foot problem?
So we're not actively working in that area. As you know, there's a lot of startups actually doing the kind of small delivery bot in that small delivery bot space. The system we're building is very much focused at the moment on the urban core and dealing with these kind of crazy city driving scenarios. It could certainly be adapted, but that's not a focus at the current time.
One more here from Twitter. You've got Ford and now VW as OEM partners. Are you looking at additional partners or making your platform available as a product to additional companies if they aren't necessarily equity partners?
It's something that we're open to in the future. We're not doing it just yet in terms of making it open to, non-equity partners. We have the option to do that, if it's the right business case. But we're after, already a huge opportunity here in just getting the Ford and VW fleets, sort of powered with our technology. And so that's very much our focus. Again, on another OEM or another investor, there's still fundraising to go, right? This is, as I've always said, this is a time, people, and capital intensive endeavor. So we'll see where those roads take us. But nothing to announce at this time, something that we're, always looking for. Well, if someone rings our phone, I'll answer it. How's that?
Okay.
Bryan, since I always tend to look at the consumer side of this, I'm interested in understanding right now people don't even like electric vehicles because they don't understand them. And you mentioned the educational part of it. But how do we work on getting people to trust these vehicles and to understand them and to see the benefits of them?
Right. Yeah. No, this is a really important question around trust. And I'm not going to pretend that I have the answer. I don't think anyone does. I will say that our approach is absolutely to be as transparent as we can and to serve an educational role as much as possible so that we can help make what we're doing less kind of science fiction and more tangible and real. I find that when we give people rides in the car and we show them the care that we take in developing it and all the tests that we've gone through, many people, their comment is, wow, this is way better than my 16 or 17-year-old, right? I think to me, we can climb that mountain a fair way with just those two simple ingredients of transparency and education. And those are things that we're looking to do our part. We have some of the cities we're particularly interested in just, well, how do you test these vehicles while the technology is not ready? And so we built out a portion on our website called How We Test, which I think is probably the most exhaustive description that any company's put out there in terms of just how much care we take in training our test drivers and how we are developing the technology. And we're going to continue to add on to that and also through other forums to try to, bring people along for the journey who are interested in knowing more.
Yeah.
A big part of that, I think, is the No Parking podcast that you're doing, that you're going to be launching soon, which is, part of that educational effort.
That's right.
I'm really looking forward to listening to that. And we actually, just before this show, you and I and Alex Roy recorded an episode of that'll be coming up in the coming weeks.
Yep. So. Alex, our always entertaining host, is sort of leading the charge. We've got a good mix of, folks coming out of the cities that we're testing in that are, interested in what we're doing, as well as folks who are kind of more technical. And so it's a great mix of dialogue around all things automated vehicles. So it should be pretty cool.
Well, I think one of the things that I really love about this technology, even though I think we can all agree we all love to drive, is just the accessibility that it gives to people that can't drive, that are disabled in some way, the blind, people that now have to depend on others. I just love the idea of them having that type of independence, especially aging populations and such. It's really, really, really exciting. I'm so happy you've been able to join us.
We do as well. It's a hugely important part of the constituency that I think is obviously has an interest in seeing this technology get deployed, and we want to work with those folks as well.
All right. Well, Bryan, I really want to thank you again for joining us today. This, as always, great conversation. It's always great to talk to you about what's going on in this space. And thanks. And Rebecca, Dan, any last thoughts?
I just wonder if you weren't doing autonomous vehicles, what would you be doing?
Oh, wow. I love woodworking. If I was independently wealthy, I probably would still be doing this. Actually, I love the self-driving car thing.
So you want to be Ron Swanson?
But yeah, to some degree, yeah. Or who's the guy from Parks and Recreation?
That's Ron Swanson.
Is that Ron Swanson? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I would. That would be great. He seems to kind of work when he wants to. Otherwise, he's in his barn like building something. That's me.
That's awesome.
All right.
Yeah. Sounds good to me. Being able to afford anything is the problem.
That's right. That's right. Well, thanks for having me.
All right. And
thanks, Bryan.
We'll wrap it up, and we'll talk to you all next time.